I'm Ankita, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the last day of the Virtual Emerging Ideas Conference hosted by Edelweiss Wealth Management. The last 2 days have been pretty enriching as we sail through topics on rural economy to India's economic malaise to fundamental and technical aspects of investing. In our first session today, we address the cause that has forced us into our current lifestyle of working from home, among many other changes that we are gradually embracing now. COVID-19 has changed our lives irrevocably. Our aim for the next 1 hour is to do the prognosis of the virus, deciphering its impact on global growth, and addressing the changing trade dynamics that have come into place with China's realignment in global economy. Joining us today is Dr. Shamika Ravi, who has been instrumental in deciphering the data-driven trend of COVID right from day one up until today. And she has been a source of information for millions of Indian households on a day-to-day basis. In April, when Twitter came out of a list of accounts to follow across the world for tracking COVID-19, Dr. Ravi featured on it amongst the most eminent personalities globally. She serves as a non-resident fellow for the Brookings Institution, Washington, and prior to that was a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. Dr. Ravi teaches courses in game theory and impact investing in various leading global universities. And I believe our investor community will be delighted to know that she is also on the SEBI committee formed for bringing to reality the vision of social stock exchange in India, an exchange for investments that values both social and financial returns. Her research work has been featured and cited by BBC, The Guardian, Financial Times, and host of media outlets, and she has researched on a vast spectrum of topics, reaching from infrastructure to gender inequality to debt dynamics. So, ma'am, very warm welcome to the show, and we are delighted and privileged to host you today. Over to you now, Dr. Ravi.
Thank you, Ankita, and hello, everyone who's been able to join us early morning. Now, imagine 100 years back when our ancestors were stuck in very similar pandemic. This was a global called the Spanish flu, without access to any of the technology and communication, techniques which we have today. So I'm just glad that while we are in the midst of a pandemic, we are able to connect. I take this opportunity. The status of the pandemic is, of course, our concentration is India. We are all sitting at home in our country, greatly concerned about where this is headed. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot of what do we know about the virus, how the different states are faring, and then we can move on to talk about what does it foretell for the economy and in particular, the changing nature of our relationship with one of our major trading partners, which is China. So let's start off by first putting out facts. Now, there are many opinions on the pandemic, and that is welcome from the scientific community, but the science of it is still at an early stage, and there are many unknowns as far as this virus is concerned. But there are certain facts beyond those opinions. There are certain emerging trends which can be considered as facts, which give us some degree of comfort. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that the case fatality rate, meaning of 100 cases of COVID that we have globally and in India, fewer and fewer people are dying from it, right, from the infection. So that is a very welcome sign, and it will continue to decline as more and more cases emerge. Now, the lead cause of this is, of course, that it's no longer a completely unknown virus. Disease protocols, the treatment protocols are being developed, and early detection is leading to a better management. So I think this is an important aspect. In India, while we do have, and today we probably have crossed 28 lakh, but as of this is yesterday's number, we do have more than 27 lakh cases, but it's important to note that what is growing very fast, even within this number, is the share of the recovered. Okay? So as of now, our fatality from this is about 1.9%. That's the red little sliver you are seeing, which of course is increasing because we are losing about 900 daily. But the active cases, the additional active cases daily is declining. So that's another cause of concern. While we know that this juggernaut of massive outbreak, contagion continues. One very key factor which has kept people globally who are watching this, it is a race, and yet it is not, because every country is dealing with it from a relatively unknown. The management of it will continue in the long term till we have a vaccine, simply because even though several countries have seen peaks and the numbers have come down, very many, including Japan, Iran, places like Germany, you've had massive resurgence. Spain now more recently, and other European countries, which did manage to get a certain control after the national lockdowns that were imposed in those countries, are now seeing another revival. In fact, in Japan and Iran, the second wave that they're witnessing is much larger than the first one. That just goes to show that, again, till we have a vaccine, this problem, this virus is not going away. Right? So this will continue to resurge, and we will have to manage it. So unlike most other countries, the big countries, particularly US, and you're looking at Western European countries, where they did flatten means the active cases began to decline. India has not seen a peak yet. And of course, I'll give you a reason in about a second as to how large federal country, democracy, where health is a state subject, large federal democracies have their own dynamics. And that's the view you must take on the US and Brazil. And at least in terms of India, we know exactly the details of the movement of people and how the infection has grown from one state to the other. Now, if you look at just the caseload, how common is this infection amongst people, then you will notice that several Middle Eastern, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, massive infections within the nation. But look at Chile, 20,000 per billion. Relatively in India, the infection is still growing. So it is relatively a less prevalence. Of course, the sero surveys which we are doing, which picks up antibody presence in the population, that seems to suggest, again, globally and across Indian cities, that this virus is far more common. But by logic, obviously, by extension, it means that, therefore, it is far less deadly. If many more people are infected and they're carrying antibodies and have been infected, in the case fatality, the infection fatality is therefore much lower than even the 1.9% that we are picking up based on the data. If you look at it in terms of number of deaths per million, there can be reporting issues. Different countries have different capacities. In India, particularly death registration, we are not very good at. Even our most advanced states, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, do have death registration, which are not universal. So that remains a problem. However, COVID is being tracked closely across and even accounting for reporting bias does not quite explain the massive gap we are seeing between several Western European countries, like Belgium, 870 deaths per million. Right? If you look at UK, more than 600 deaths per million. These are almost 700 now. Very, very big difference. Meaning, if we had similar death rate as many of the European countries, we would have seen more than 9 lakh, close to 10 lakh COVID deaths. And clearly, that is not. Now, the reasons can vary, and the hypotheses are out there to be proven. Could be innate immunity, could be strand of the virus. We don't know. All we are seeing are the observed numbers in terms of death. This is another way to look at the same. And look at Belgium. Look at Peru. Peru is fast increasing. It's already crossed 850 deaths. These are very, very large number of deaths in this country. And in India, of course, we have crossed 37. But in comparison, you're getting a sense of how deadly or how fatal this is relative to many of the countries. Now, the daily number that we are shown every day, and we are sort of capturing by the state bulletins, show that around 63,000 new cases are being detected every day. But you have to look at this picture in totality. Those are the new number of cases, but you also have close to 57,000 recoveries daily. The additional active cases that are being added are actually steadily declining. That's the left-hand bottom panel. If you look at additional daily active cases that are getting added to the tally, that is declining and it's below 5,000 now. Which seems to suggest, now why are active cases important? Because active cases tell you the real demand on our health infrastructure. These are the people amongst whom 10% or so will require some degree of hospitalization. Maybe a smaller fraction will require oxygen support, ICU, etc. So active cases declining is a very good sign because it seems to suggest that the additional burden on our health infrastructure, which itself is quite modest and in many states poor, that thankfully, that pressure is declining. What is, of course, another reality is that we are losing more than 900 people every day to COVID. And that remains a trend which is worrying and that should ideally decline. India is a very large country. Yesterday, more than 13,000 cases, new cases in Maharashtra. While on the whole, we are waiting whether we are going to attain a peak soon, what's going to happen, will it be a plateau? It's important to remember that for a large federal country, different states are managing this pandemic very differently. You are going to have many peaks. And it is very clear that till we handle hotspots like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, now increasingly Andhra Pradesh is becoming a great hotspot, it'll be very difficult for us to talk about a national peak without talking about peaks in these hotspots. And yet you have places like Delhi, which has clearly peaked about a month and a half back. And since then, you're seeing active number. Many new states are beginning to. You can see Uttarakhand, you can see Chhattisgarh. These are places where counts are increasing, and therefore the pressure on the health is high. In terms of the major cities, because this still remains largely concentrated in urban areas, though the growth is now increasing in the rural parts of the country. You're seeing that while Delhi has peaked and is improving, Pune has become a bigger hotspot than Mumbai. And still, at the rate of growth they are maintaining, it looks like they are going to surpass Delhi, even Delhi. Mumbai has not seen a movement despite now 3-4 months of constant sort of vigil and watch. Thane is becoming piling up cases. Look at Chennai. Chennai has shown an improvement, stabilized around 1,000. So what you're seeing is that cities are grappling. Some are succeeding in lowering the case count, while many new hotspots are emerging. At the end, it's the death rate that matters. Okay, so Bombay has a death rate of 5.5%, very high compared to all India average of. Delhi has 2.6, cause of concern. Though, because Delhi has peaked, it seems like the death rate in Delhi will come down, simply because more lives will be saved. Pune, the death rates are increasing. What is good in places where you do have good health infrastructure, like Bangalore, etc., is that though the number of cases are increasing, the death rates are much lower than all. Including if you look at Andhra Pradesh, East Godavari, Kurnool, and all, the death rates are below 1%. So they're able to manage, as of now, these numbers are increasing, but as of now, many parts of the country have managed this disease. On the whole, the growth of the disease or the infection is slowing. Okay? And this is yesterday's growth rate of active cases is 0.2. As you can see, with subsequent lockdowns, the spread of the infection has slowed down. It is still positive. It means the growth is still happening. It is still growing. We haven't quite stopped the growth yet. That's why the numbers are declining. But the growth rate itself has slowed down considerably, and we are very close to the zero, which means zero growth. Now, what do we know? We have not peaked. We are going to monitor states and cities to see how each of them peak, because it really, and this is important to know that while we are talking statistics, the experience of an individual citizen in the country really depends on the health infrastructure, the administrative capacity of their district administration, right? It is not a national level. We have policies, we have guidelines, we have testing protocols, etc. But eventually, it will be the state administration and the district administrative capacity which will determine how well we handle this. So state capacity is a very major factor in the way India is managing it. But clearly, while the subsequent lockdowns have reduced the speed of growth, it has not been uniform across different states. And in fact, that's why we are seeing states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Delhi, MP, now West Bengal have experienced high mortality rate. All India. What is, I think, troubling and therefore leading to the overall uncertainty is, remember, as economists, as people watching what is happening to livelihood and overall the economy performance, we are concerned about the nature of the uncertainty. And do we know more? Can we manage better? Can we plan better? And it is, I think, one of the biggest constraints we have in India right now is we just don't have a lot of data. We still don't know what is the incubation period in India. We still don't know what is the serial interval. Even the reproduction rates, I mean, we are sort of calculating from large macro data, but these are things that should be calculated from patient level data and shared so that we know how infectious is it. Also, from past pandemics, we know that, the past SARS that we had about years back, we know that not everybody is equally infectious. We do have concepts of super spreaders. In fact, the SARS-1, you had about 6% of the patients or infected people who were responsible for over 80% of the total infections, which means we need this kind of information to be able to isolate super spreaders at certain congregations and events, and then open the economy and sort of try and bring in more confidence amongst not just consumers but also firms. They know at what capacity they can produce. Is there going to be a growth in demand? Will people go out and buy? So it's really lack of information at a highly disaggregated level, which is leading to the uncertainty. But these are the global longer scenario. Right? Scenario one could be the past is, the worst is behind us and it's only going to peter down. Scenario two could be the Spanish flu, which means fall season, autumn season is the time when you see a lot of flu globally. So can we see a second large wave? And some say that in Europe, the numbers that are rising now could be that resurgence of a second wave. But I think because the disease protocols have developed, we know what exactly needs to be done, the physical distancing, isolation of, old age homes. I think we are not going to see a wave as large as the second, which was seen 100 years back. Flu. Scenario three is still we have a vaccine. We do have an exaggerated or a big wave in every flu season or every season, which we COVID season. Come and it go until you have a vaccine. This is going to be a long-term uncertainty to deal with. Now, India is testing a lot, unlike what the common press generally talks about. Of course, the mix of RT-PCR and the nature of the tests, whether rapid tests are good or not, whether or not. Remember, there are many kinds of rapid tests that India has. So on the whole, we are testing more and more, close to 22,000, more than that now per million. The positivity rate is beginning to steady and hopefully will decline. But many states are keeping their positivity rate quite low. And that's a cause of comfort. Places like UP, you have Rajasthan, you have Gujarat, which has actually, after a pretty bad situation in May and June, have quite reversed the trend. And then around NCR, things are improving. You're seeing Madhya Pradesh, Punjab. So on the whole, huge variations across states, even in terms of testing and tracing. But why is testing important? Actually, this is for those of you who might have. The higher the test positivity, meaning out of 100, how many people are testing positive? So higher that test positivity rate, the more difficult it is to manage such large number of patients. So that's why early detection is really the best policy intervention. That's why testing is important. What you're seeing here is a very positive and strong correlation between positivity rate in the state and deaths per million. Right? And it's really just an indication of early intervention, early detection. And that is the only way we can keep the deaths low. That's why testing is very important. Now, as far as the economy is concerned, it is very clear to the health economist like us that, look, the roadmap for economic recovery in India and globally, let's talk about India, will go right through healthcare sector. There is no circumventing this by wishing this infection away, this virus away. Now, the two simultaneous crises that are happening is that our economy cannot be effectively reopened without credibly addressing fears of resurgence. Because we know that the economic crisis is caused by this health crisis because typically when you are in this state of fear and panic, people neither consume, so demand will remain low. People don't work. You try to minimize work, minimize interaction, as much as possible, and people definitely don't invest. Now, remember, investment in India, private investment has been declining since 2012-13. So this has only gotten accentuated further with the fear of the pandemic. So it's not just a demand side problem. Some people do think that this is if we manage demand, we can get the economy back on track. I personally don't think so. Because even if we were to give a certain amount of money into every Indian's pocket today, it will not translate into, most likely, precautionary savings will go up. And that is because people are fearful. And that is what fear and uncertainty does. It forces you to save rather than spend in them. So we have to really address the economic recovery by addressing this fear of the inflation. What does that mean? That just keep ramping up. Let testing become a commodity, a commonly available commodity, and increasingly technology is providing a lot of solutions. So this test and isolate policy must be a continuous policy in the country. The testing capacity at a block level. Look, all of India will remain under the shadow of this infection till all of India really is able to say that we have overcome the pandemic, which means we can't say Delhi and Mumbai have improved while Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh are still grappling with the problem, because in large federal democracies, movement of people will happen. It is almost impossible to do a China-like containment, a strict containment. So the resurgence will always remain a real threat. So, and this you saw in the announcement of the finance minister in the last economic package that she did, which is that we are attempting to have a lab, testing lab, diagnostic lab in every block of the country, right? Now, as of now, of course, we have more than 10,000 labs in the country, but most of them are concentrated in urban areas or in townships. So this now, policy intervention-wise, is an important area of scrutiny. Then, of course, the other is every district hospital should ideally have an infectious disease ward. And this is not just for COVID. India has about 4 lakh deaths a year from tuberculosis. Now, imagine COVID, even after we get a vaccine in, let's say, a couple of years, everyone will have it. But TB remains an infectious disease that we have to grapple with. And that is the reality of India's public health problem. That since we are losing such a large number of people under TB, it is largely a reflection of what does it do to human capital? What does it do to a disease and morbidity in the population at large? Right? It affects consumption, it drains people. It's a leading cause of impoverishment in the country, health expenditure. So infectious disease is something we live with, and I think COVID has provided us with that immediate shock, which I think the only way to address is strengthen the infectious disease capacity. We are not a first world country. We are not a rich country, so we can't wish away infectious diseases. Unlike those countries where NCDs are the main concern, NCDs are growing in India, but infectious disease are still very much prevalent. Now, from the economy point of view, look, most of you who are here and you're investors, you do realize that lockdowns are leading to tremendous opportunity cost, which means we are losing money by not fully opening, performing at, let's say, 100% and so on. Which means we are expecting a shrinkage. We are in a depression. Now, the nature of this depression, how it will evolve, will really depend on which sector you're in. And eventually, what happens to this disease, to this pandemic. But great loss in terms of informal workers, livelihood, though that is a sector which is also flexible and has shown a good sort of a recovery. But on the whole, employment remains a very large concern given this pandemic. We are also, of course, you do realize that the NPA problem, which we were grappling for the last now almost a decade, will only get aggravated because with decline, lower demand, the revenues are declining. So leveraged sectors will find it increasingly difficult to meet those obligations. And I think it's these kind of risks and uncertainties which are leading governments to basically announce loan guarantees as a measure, but it still remains a work in progress. We still have to see the banking sector sort of take up the government on that guarantee and actually extend credit line. But we also have to see what is the demand for credit, right? Given the expected revenue next quarter. The long-term strategy is look till a vaccine is readily available. 18 months to 24, so a year and a half to two, containment, contact tracing, and testing will remain newest exercise. It's not going to stop at any time. So all of you get your masks. Just this is going to be the new normal. Yes, right. All possible precautions, even at the workspace. I think firms should be incentivized. Firms already, I think, do have the incentive to test and their workers and try and maintain physical distancing, because we have seen in manufacturing, shop floors, etc., outbreaks and loss of life. So I think firms can also join this effort towards getting their workforce tested regularly, maintaining hand hygiene, basic physical distancing, perhaps run multiple shifts, try to stagger people's gathering, etc. So I think we'll have to innovate around it. But eventually, I think on the larger economic turmoil and which is going on, one thing which the last couple of months clear to many countries, but for us, is that our relationship with China, the economic relationship, will undergo realignment and a considerable one. And I'm not just talking about banning of Chinese apps or what has triggered, along the line of control, you're seeing skirmishes, and that has become a common, frequent feature. And it's not just for India. China seems to be having these skirmishes and these acts of aggression across many of their international borders. So it is becoming a sort of a recurrent theme. And one thing to recognize is that, our dependence on China, and eventually how well we realign and this decoupling, how smooth it will be, will depend on what's the nature of dependence. Now, the Chinese presence in India is not insignificant, right? When we know that close to 800 Chinese companies are there in the Indian market, we know that 75 major manufacturing facilities, and mostly these are, low manufacturing electronics like smartphones, consumer appliances, the construction sector, chemicals. There are many sectors which are, sectors of growth in India, which have been and which are strategic sectors, do remain. We do know that almost 2/3 of our APIs in the pharma sector come from China. So our dependence is there, and in particularly certain strategic sectors of interest. But that realignment is necessary globally now. That is being seen, and in India, you're also seeing a sort of a changing demand, consumer demand changing against the mood is changing again. So I think that is also what has led to this great call for Atmanirbhar. It is not just, of course, China; it is also the changing nature of the global economy. But it's not, again, just India. WTO. If you look at WTO, then they have had more than 1,000 cases against China, and more than 100 products dumping has been proven that China is dumping. So you are seeing a lot of cases emerge at these multilateral institutions. Not just so it's not just India which is facing this. We are seeing this kind of a sort of realignment or decoupling efforts being seen across many democracies. And traditionally now, when industry argues for infant industry, which says that we are young and we are uncompetitive, so we need protection, we know that after 70 years, I don't think the need for protectionism in India is on the basis of, to protect our domestic industry. I think some areas, some sectors have shown, and if we look at IT, India has done well, but we also have to think of what more is needed to go to the next phase of IT, which is the AI revolution. What kind of investment in R&D? Where are we lacking? How do we catch up? So eventually, I think it's important to note that the whole call for Atmanirbhar that you're seeing, which is a large part triggered by Chinese behavior and over dependence, particularly as far as inputs are concerned, in strategic sectors. But you will see India making efforts towards entering more free trade agreement with other parts of the world. And we do need more free trade. We need to have closer partnership and relations with countries which are plugged into the larger global chain. We have to be part of that. But, the expectation that firms that are leaving China will automatically come to India is also unfounded. because India, while the ease of doing business rankings have been improving, we still have to compete with countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand, which are attracting a fair share of these out-moving firms from China. And I think India, we still have to do a lot in terms of attracting these massive investments, big firms, big global giants. And I think that is where, and that is the true spirit within which Atmanirbhar Bharat has to be understood, that eventually it's not about protectionism. It should not turn into a protectionist call. It is about making Indian producers globally competitive. And we have seen this, whether it was Germany or the US under Hamilton, that whenever they countries impose this large sort of barriers to trade or import, it was done against the expectation that those economies will become more efficient and develop comparative advantages and competitiveness in certain sectors. That is the expectation of Indian domestic industry as well, that the call for Atmanirbhar Bharat will be answered by rising productivity, rising competitiveness of the Indian businesses. So I think it is not just a matter of policy. I think Indian industry, Indian producers have to be partners in this. But just to tell you, in China and India story, we were richer than them just 40 years back. This is per capita basis. So just talking. And yet China has really, if you look at the GDP per capita, since the year 2000, China's overtaking India is a 20-year story. So growth is very real. The way they have rapidly grown is a recent phenomenon, really 20 years. But this is the final slide I want to leave you with, that what you're seeing in China is a declining trade to GDP ratio, which means the strategic relevance of trade to the Chinese economy is declining. In fact, you're seeing as of 2018 that the trade to GDP is now lesser than 2000. It goes back to the same significance as 20 years back. Now, when that happens, you are going to see China search for new avenues, new areas of growth. And I think that is one of the reasons why you're seeing so many tensions along their borders. I think we are going to see China for what it is a global giant is looking for new avenues of growth. And I think we have to be prepared to respond to those growing calls by creating alliances, global alliances with like-minded countries, with like-minded democracies, liberal democracies. So I think this is the reality of the Chinese economy, the declining importance of trade in their economy. You are going to see more and more such episodes, what we saw in seeing in the South. So I think it is not just an Indian problem. It becomes a problem for similar democracies in Europe, US, Latin America. So it is a larger problem that countries will have to deal with. And of course, the onus for us is to deal with it the way we can do best. And I think Atmanirbhar Bharat has to be seen from this point of view. So I want to stop with that, Ankita, and I'm very happy to questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ravi, for a comprehensive overview of COVID-19 stats, but also giving us a roundup of domestic and global economy trends. The house is open for questions. You all can use the Ask a Question button on your screen to post the questions, and we've already got many of them for you. So I would club some of them. So one of our clients is asking that many sero surveys have indicated that infection among hotspots maybe is increasing, and especially for the Pune city, the one that came out yesterday, it's above 51%. So what do you make of the seroprevalence? Secondly, what do you think is the real concept of herd immunity, and is there any agglomerate globally that has reached there? And finally, there are studies that are highlighting that antibodies that are prevalent in these surveys, that they have different strains of the virus. So what does it say about the effectiveness of vaccine as and when we have it?
Well, let me start out by first addressing the seroprevalence survey results we are seeing globally. Right, it started with the whole LA experience, then the San Francisco, Germany did it. Then we know from London. And now more recently, 2 months back, we saw for Delhi. And now we saw Bombay about a couple of weeks back. And yesterday, 2 days back, we saw from Pune. Seroprevalence surveys basically capture antibodies, whether people have antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. And therefore, then we can conclude that people have been infected, right? Or they have antibodies against this virus. Now, these surveys globally are showing the prevalence of the disease to be multifold of what the daily RT-PCR or the case count is showing. So even in India, while it is 27 or 28 lakh, our seroprevalence seems to suggest that 57% of Mumbai slums or 17% of the rest of Mumbai, you're seeing 50% of Pune have been infected or are carrying antibodies to it. Now, these seem to suggest, first of all, I think the insights from the immunology literature is quite insightful. It is telling us that the body actually already has mechanisms of immunity against this. It is not as novel. The body is not treating this virus to be as novel as we have thought it to be. By extension, it also means that therefore it is far less fatal. If many more people have it and the number of deaths are what they are, then naturally it is far less fatal than what it was touted to be a couple of months. Right. So that is the overall sense of how you should look at the seroprevalence survey. Of course, eventually it will depend on the test for the antibody to SARS-CoV-2, which means if, and this is now, I don't want to, delve into the immunology literature, but from whatever I'm reading, it seems to appear that the T cells do have memory. People who have had SARS-CoV-1 17 years back still carry antibodies or immunity against the current virus. So there is memory in the body. The body is responding in perhaps far stronger and gallant ways than we expected it to be. So the immunity might be more than anticipated. Yet I think the science on herd immunity is not very clear. Because even in places which have very high degree of prevalence, cities are, or the scientists have not declared a herd immunity, and therefore let's go back to life as normal. Even, places with high prevalence are adhering to the protocols and the norms of physical distancing. You've had resurgence in some places which have gone back to national emergency status or a lockdown status. It seems to suggest that unless herd immunity is very well understood, and obviously herd immunity depends on how infectious this is. The more infectious it is, the more a larger fraction of the population will need to have it for us to then say that we have herd immunity. So what is that number? Is it 20%? Is it 40? Is it 70? Is it 90? It is not very clear yet. So that's the status we.
Thanks, Dr. Ravi. So I think the sero surveys have just told us that, the immunity is higher, the spread seems to be higher. So overall fatality of the virus is rather lower than the day-to-day stats that we are tracking. On the vaccine, ma'am, so basically, do you think that we'll have a vaccine by 2020? Is that believable for you? Secondly, even when we have the necessary approvals for a vaccine, how much time does it take for it to reach a common man, let's say in Mumbai or rather in tier 2, tier 3 cities of India?
These are loaded questions. And there's, of course, the ethical point of it. Who will get it? What will the line look like? Right? So all those issues will have to be dealt with. Well, it is very clear that unlike ever in the past, we do have now, under this pandemic, many global alliances and countries coming together, best minds coming together, firms coming together to try and discover a vaccine. Mm-hmm. We have seen some positive results come out from the first phase of the trial and the second phase from multiple different sources, including, of course, the ones in Oxford. We are hearing from various producers in the US that they are entering phase. We have, of course, also heard from the Russians and the Chinese. We have our own Covaxin in India, which has gone into a trial phase. So there is a great race And that is good, because globally it is as much competition as the need to cooperate in these times for the creation of a vaccine, which is happening, which we have not seen historically. So that's a good thing. The uncertainty of it is that, as Dr. Fauci mentioned, that he's been studying HIV for 40 years, and we still don't have a vaccine for HIV. And in many ways, this virus is complicated and it's coming up with complications. So I don't want to frighten people, but I just want to caution against this mass hysteria and a timeline that, look, will we get it? It looks unlikely, frankly, simply because the third phase will also take time. Randomized controlled trial in the third phase is over a very large number of people, right? Different age group, different ethnicities, different comorbidities. You're going to try and see the effectiveness of the vaccine at a very large scale before you scale it up. So the third phase itself will take a couple of months. And from then to then mass production, of course, you have the Serum Institute, and you do have several other manufacturers globally who have created the capacity. That once we know that the vaccine is effective, I think the back end, the capacity to manufacture it en masse, I think that has been prepared. That is not very difficult to do. But I think it is more the uncertainty of the vaccine's effectiveness itself, which is a phase we need to cross before we think of mass production. But the mass production capacity exists. But then from there to giving it en masse, I think that remains a work in progress. Now, remember, India has had very successful large vaccination drives. And so it is a day-to-day, we have the mechanism and the state capacity to really administer vaccine in villages and smaller townships, etc., across the country. So that capacity exists. I don't think that is really a key constraint right now.
Okay. So there's a follow-up question. Do you think we are better off with an antiviral and a medicine over a vaccine at the current point? And is there any literature which tells us if an antiviral can take the total fatality rate to 0 and give us a green signal to venture out?
I'm not very clear on this, because I don't think the science of it is very clear that what is that antiviral which will, there can be certain delay, there can be a faster recovery once you have reached a certain phase. But on the whole, WHO has not come up with anything. The CDC has not come up with anything. The ICMR has not come up with anything in particular. So we'll just have to wait for the science of it to evolve before we'll know that. All we know is that it's not as fatal as we thought it would.
Okay. So we'll take some questions on the India's manufacturing, geography basically. So the question is that India's labor has been suffering first with demonetization, then GST, and then there was informal employment that got really hurt during the COVID-19 pandemic. So how can we boost our labor-intensive exports, textiles or leather that we are into, and what factors reforms do we need to get manufacturing on track in India? And can we do it quick enough?
So I think one is the recognition that the only way in the long term, let's say 100-year vision for India, has to be that we cannot remain an agrarian. And today we have close to half the labor force still employed in agriculture. Now, the issue is that agriculture, however much technology we can take to agriculture, there are limits to productivity growth. And that's the nature of agricultural markets, that there will be ceiling on how much it can potentially, productivity, how much can it be increased. So in the long term, that's why today amongst the developed nation, or any pathways we've had for development, that transformation from agriculture to manufacturing to services is very important. Now, in India, what has clearly happened is the missing middle. The manufacturing has not increased at the rate it has. And yet you saw, evidence from China seems to suggest that manufacturing as a share now is coming down. It is services in China which is now taking. So this appear to be now well into their third phase.
Yes.
Now, in India, there is no getting around strengthening manufacturing, simply because from agriculture into semi-skilled manufacturing is a natural pathway. While we have done well in certain sectors, certain labor-intensive sectors remain largely, let's say, not as competitive as, let's say, Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, of course. Not just on account of technology alone, it also has to do with some of our import restrictions. The fact that, production is costly in India because of policy distortion. So I think allowing for cheaper imports of certain kinds of inputs, and frankly also working with the labor markets, so as and you are seeing in UP, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat in the beginning of the pandemic. I think in UP and MP, largely in response to large number of people going back to these states, that they are looking to dismantle some of the prohibitive labor laws that have kept investment away. So labor can be made more productive. I think labor intensive manufacturing can be scaled up in many of these eastern states, which are labor abundant, by simply also reforming the labor laws, which have been quite restrictive. Now, at some level, you have to remember that we have far more restrictive labor laws for a country which is low middle income country. In many ways, we mimic the benefits and the labor laws and the kind of protection what OECD, rich, affluent economies have had. And so it is, I think that reality check, I think is important, and states are responding. So I think that trial and error phase has begun. So let's hope that COVID will see transformation as far as the labor policies across the country.
Thanks, Dr. Ravi. So there is this question that, in almost every crisis, it is the state which bears the burden of revival. As you all know, COVID-19 hit us at a time when Indian economy was already not doing well, unlike what happened in the great financial crisis of 08-09. So at this point, when state is already suffering revenue losses, what is the recipe of recovery and what kind of levers should be used at this juncture?
Well, it is very clear in the Indian case that state will remain, Ankita, state will remain a very dominant player in the Indian economy for the next several decades, right? And that is, when you read the DNA of the Indian economy, it is very clear that state is a very important player. And in many ways, it's a good thing because we still have very large number of people who are around, very vulnerable population. And therefore, the need to strengthen health, the whole idea behind Ayushman Bharat, there are many things that only the state can provide. And at this phase of growth, I think the state has a very important role, but let's not remain in any kind of an illusion that the state is what will lead the growth. I think what is very clear since 1991, and more importantly from the 2000 onwards, after NDA 1, is that the phase of exponential growth that India has seen has been on the back of course, a lot of cheap credit, but a lot of it was heavy infrastructure investment and on the back of private enterprise. I think private enterprise in India has shown wealth creation can happen at a very rapid phase, which it did. But you need the right policies. The overheating that we saw after UPA 1 and after UPA 2 is a problem we are still grappling with. Banking sector problem is it is still very much a problem to be solved. But one stats that I want to leave with people is that, if you look at the total bank credit to GDP, to the private sector, and in China, it's about 140%. So that's the kind of credit which is going to the private sector. In India, it is below 40%. Which seems to suggest that the state and the public sector units, and by state, I mean, it's not just the government, but large number of public sector units and government projects, there is a certain amount of, they have crowded out a very large part of, private market as well, because the overall loan, the credit going to private sector in India is not that high. And it ideally, it has to be improved further. So we have to get to the heart of the problem sometimes as well and ask that, do we need so many public sector banks? Can we restructure them in the way they were meant to? Not all public sector banks were supposed to do the same thing. Today, they are mostly clones of each other. And that is one of the bigger problems. Can they specialize in the areas that they were meant to? Can we have fewer of them? Can we have more private banks? Can we have RBI regulate them equally? So, it gets to the heart of some of the basic distortions, and which keeps the balance in the Indian economy heavily in favor of state enterprises. And I think those are basic reforms on the factor side that I think we have to, they're long overdue. I think some of it is being attempted. If you think of, agriculture sector finally getting some reforms, by dismantling of the APMCs. You're talking about reforming the energy sector, which has been suffering for a decade. So I think the COVID era is also given government some degree of clarity that, look, if we can't really spend our way, we can attempt structural reforms. But I do think that there is no getting out of this pandemic and this uncertainty without increasing our health spending and without prioritizing. It's not just spending. Health, therefore human capital, is a very leading constraint to India's growth. You cannot grow on the back of relatively uneducated, untrained, and unhealthy population. So I think we are not doing enough in terms of human capital. And health is definitely at the heart of that. And I hope this pandemic is a wake-up call for the government response.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi, for raising such pertinent questions that are, at the heart of India's economic struggle to move forward. And as you rightly mentioned, human capital is very important, and therefore the spend on healthcare, infra and healthcare should go up. Now, Dr. Ravi, there's a question that humans have progressed by being able to gather in large numbers, be it because they had common gods or common nations. Now, COVID-19 as a global community has united us against one virus. So COVID has rather accelerated that trend, but it's more online than it was before. So are we missing the potential of being perennially connected by, being on the wrong side this time?
Well, I don't think so, because we are also seeing a lot of fractions, no? What you're beginning to see is a lot of countries taking positions. If you look at the geostrategic evolutions, changes over the last couple of months, I think countries are taking positions as far as China is concerned. You are seeing, in many ways, discrediting, and unfortunately, of large multilateral, very important institutions like the WHO. So while it is true that we are seeing great, let's say global alliance as far as vaccines are concerned, we are seeing sort of meeting of minds on other counts, we are also seeing new fractions. We are seeing a lot of global institutions under tremendous pressure. And that is bound to happen. When countries are under pressure, people are under pressure, institutions cannot pretend, as business as usual, and goes on. And therefore, I think restructuring a lot of these large institutions, including if you think of trade relations, if you're thinking of, the arbiters of trade relations across countries, then I think vis-a-vis China, there is a great sense that, crony capitalism with Chinese characteristics or trade with Chinese characteristics, that is not sustainable for the rest of the world. Because the state, is a great influencer and shaper of the way Chinese economy is. So for individual firms to then deal, and you are seeing this in the form of now, it's not just TikTok and a couple, let's say 56 apps getting banned in India. You're going to see now similar waves in the US. And most likely you will see extension of that in Europe and elsewhere, because the democracies are realizing that you can't have this unequal sort of a relationship. It is not sustainable. And remember, even in terms of the apps, the kind of information a lot of Chinese apps harvest is is unnecessarily more. They just harvest a lot of data. And therefore, the sense of insecurity and what is being done with this at very individual private privacy level is going to shape the new world order. And technology will be at the forefront of that. So no, I mean, I'm not as optimistic as you, but I'm also not pessimistic, because I do think technology has made it possible for meeting of minds. And just look at us, the fact that we can have this convention sitting all far apart. So many possibilities are there, of course.
Definitely new possibility has emerged with technology stepping in. Dr. Ravi, you've been doing a lot of research and you've been involved with impact investing also. So who do you think will bear the mantle of impact investing in India? So basically the private sector is a net borrower, the government is struggling for revenue, and as of now, even the household finances are stretched. So how do you see this very important trend developing in a country like India?
So impact investing, I think, is one of the reason it is not appreciated in the mainstream market. It's a growing niche market.
Yeah,
that's good. One of the reason is, I think, it is poorly understood. It is often mistaken for just CSR or philanthropy. The sustainability or the sort of the commercial angle of it is not well appreciated, and yet the reality of the Indian impact investing space is that the returns are extremely good, and particularly in sectors of agriculture and health. We are seeing, very good returns. Of course, the entire microfinance space sort of led the way. I think what will happen is the impact investing space might eventually be able to channel resources towards, the kind of massive demand we have, because the state is constrained. Right, the kind of development spending that needs to be done, we don't have the resources. There are, the guns versus butter debate will continue forever. And I think that is where the strategic importance of a sector like impact investing, and therefore the creation of a stock exchange, it's a very important. What you will also see is innovation and new products emerge. The whole idea around impact bonds, I think, is very promising. In fact, a couple of experiments that we've had in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan in education and health have shown that it's possible to design instruments which can lead to improvement in development indicators while also giving returns. So I think the instruments have to be better understood. The ground sort of work is being done right now, but the rate at which the impact investors network in India is growing, not just with Indian money.
True.
So that shouldn't be the constraint. There is a great deal of responsible investment coming from the OECD markets as well. So we have to be open to all these possibilities.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. We are a little short on time, but before I let you go for today, we would ask you for a recommendation for investors in terms of, building focus, patience, and a data-driven approach. So any views on that?
Well, data-driven, what else is there? I mean, you can either be emotionally wedded to certain investment strategy, because that has worked for people before you. But in today's day and age, given how much digitization has happened, how much data there is, I think there needs to be great investment into transforming data into information. It's not data per se, but data had to be transformed into information, and knowledge is, I think, what we should bet on. Because more knowledge is good for growth of a country, whether from the state, from policy side, or from R&D, the industry side. But I do think that the future of India does lie in human capital. There is a reason that when the Prime Minister said that India can be the HR capital of the world, I think the potential exists because we have so many young people in sheer size. But I think the quality from the health and education needs to be, and I think those are also going to be the future growth sector. I do think healthcare sector can do for India what IT sector did in the last 30 years. I think health can do in the next 100 years, because the global, all rich economies are aging. Mm-hmm. Every economy is grappling with rising costs of healthcare. So countries are looking for cost advantages. And India has that opportunity to provide, not just in terms of a large number of well-trained doctors and nurses, but the back-end IT support, the entire health IT entire space, and of course, pharma. And there's a reason India is called pharmacy to the world. We are 70% vaccines globally are provided from India. So I think we are well poised, but we need to invest more into healthcare to make it a sector of strategic relevance for our future growth. So I would say bet high on health.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. I mean, you've beautifully demonstrated the use and the potential for human capital and how we are poised for it, but we need to invest more as we make it a sector of strategic relevance. Dr. Ravi, we are short on time and we respect your time commitments. We still have a lot more questions coming in, but I think I would extend a gratitude to you for accepting our invitation and joining us today. It has been a lot of value addition for our investors thus far. Thank you so much.
Thank you.